I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, conservative bias. President Trump claimed again that social media companies discriminate against conservative speech on their platforms, adding, "We have to do something." Plus, Google Games. Alphabet unveils Tuesday a new game streaming service called Stadia at the Game Developers Conference, marking a major new foray into the $180 billion industry for the tech giant. And Apple introduces the first update to its mass desktop computers in 2 years. What you need to know about the hardware refresh. But first, to our top story, the president is once again complaining that social media companies like Facebook and Google are silencing conservative voices. Take a listen to what he had to say Tuesday.
Well, we have to do something. I tell you, I have many millions of followers on Twitter, and it's different than it used to be. Things are happening. Names are taken off. People aren't getting through. You've heard the same complaints. And it seems to be if they're conservative, if they're Republicans, if they're in a certain group, there's discrimination and big discrimination. I see it absolutely on Twitter and Facebook, which I have also, and others I see.
And yet, despite that, the president's 2020 re-election campaign is spending heavily on social media. Research from Bully Pulpit shows that Trump has spent close to double the amount of his Democratic rivals when it comes to Facebook and Google ads. To discuss, we've got Michael Beach in Washington. He's the CEO of CrossStream Media, a digital marketing analytics firm. He's also a veteran of Republican presidential ad campaigns. And here in the studio, we've got Bloomberg Tech's global executive editor, Tom Giles. So, Tom, what's new about this latest attack from President Trump on social media?
Well, it comes at a time when one of his staffers was temporarily removed from Facebook. It comes which we think was mistaken. It comes at the same time as Nunes also has sued Twitter for $250 million.
Congressman Devin Nunes.
That's right, alleging anti-bias against him. So there's a confluence of events once again, and this is just a couple of days after Facebook has gotten in trouble over the shooting, which is tangential to this, but once again, social media is in the spotlight for doing bad things.
Tell us about what happened with the staffer who was. It appeared one of the companies thought he was a bot, right?
That's my sense of it, and as far as I understand, this was it was a mistake. He was temporarily removed, but it's unfortunate the timing here. What's interesting to me is that what Facebook and Twitter will say to you is that we're adhering to our guidelines. People will be removed if they violate our terms of service. They say there is no bias here. And in fact, legal precedent so far has shown, when people have brought cases against Twitter and Facebook alleging anti-conservative bias, those cases really haven't made it very far. There hasn't really been this proof provided in the court system that they're being discriminated against.
Facebook saying and apologizing to the White House social media director, Dan Scavino, saying it mistook him for a bot. Michael, meantime, you worked for the Romney campaign, the Cruz campaign. What do you make of President Trump's spending here on Facebook and Google, and how does it compare historically to prior candidates?
I think overall it's a very smart move, and the way to look at it is that one, they're an incumbent without a primary challenge, so they're able to allocate resources a lot earlier for the general election than a campaign. A Democrat right now in the primary, they really have to worry about getting out of the primary, and so the president's campaign can focus all of their attention on persuading any kind of swing voters. And right now it's really about building their base and reaching out to those voters, and they can now do that for a 2-year period uninterrupted, which is a big advantage.
The candidates are also spending far more on Facebook than Google, 3 times as much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Facebook plays a major role in politics. I think as their platform is really second to none in terms of targeting and ease of use. The other way to look at it, in terms of social video, Facebook accounts for about 80% of social video advertising. When you look at the whole pie of video advertising, it's only about 8% of total when you include television. So there's a lot of room to grow for both Facebook and Google, as well as other channels like connected TV.
Now, Tom, meantime, all of these platforms are battling issues around hate, misinformation. As you mentioned, Representative Devin Nunes has sued Twitter for $250 million in damages and users behind anonymous Twitter accounts that he claims have smeared his name. Well, isn't this a little bit like welcome to Twitter? I mean, haven't many famous people and not famous people had their names smeared on Twitter?
People say a lot of terrible, terrible things about other people on Twitter, and I think we've all experienced it. Anyone who is a even somewhat public figure can understand this, and folks on the right, folks on the left have been victimized, and folks on both sides have been the bullies, if you will.
Is there any precedent for a case like this? Because I wonder, is he onto something?
Well, again, so far, there have been a couple of cases that have made their way into the court system, but very recently, in a case against Facebook, one of the judges appointed by Donald Trump dismissed the case. There hasn't been proof provided that these kinds of activities are going on, and in fact, it's very much in Twitter and Facebook's interest. They've been criticized for this anti-right bias for a long time, and they are going out of their way to try to demonstrate to their audiences that this doesn't exist. And I mean, to me, I look at folks across the political spectrum who seem to have no problem getting their message across. They're not being silenced, and in fact, their voice, Donald Trump, from the beginning, has used Twitter to amplify his voice and amass an increasingly growing following, despite the number of people who say he violates terms of service and he should be kicked off Twitter.
Meantime, I spoke with Trump's 2020 campaign manager, Brad Parscale, last year, and he talked about how they're going to continue to double down on these social media and tech platforms, but watch how they evolve. Take a listen to what Parscale told me.
If you're watching Facebook for 4 hours this year, but next year you're watching 3 hours of Facebook, but 1 hour of YouTube, that changes. So we're going to monitor where eyes are going. I think YouTube continues and Google continues to work on that platform and make improvements. I think what Google's done to the search algorithm also to put YouTube results at the top, they continue to put a lot of focus and they understand the value of that platform. So we're watching it closely. We're using it for a lot of things now. We're using it probably more now than we even were in 2016.
Now, Michael, do you think the scandals and controversies that are impacting Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, do you think that could influence the candidates' ad spend, or do they really have nowhere else to go?
Well, I mean, they have plenty of other options, but I think if the scandals don't impact the user base of these platforms, then the money is still going to flow there from an advertising perspective, whether it be political or non-political.
And do you think the Democratic candidates need to step it up and sort of match what President Trump is doing on these platforms?
Well, remember, they're playing a different game. So for the next 12 plus months, they're in a primary where really their entire voter base are Democrat primary voters. And so you're talking about maybe 20% of total voters is their entire audience to win the primary, whereas the president can think about the general election for the next year plus. And so that's a big advantage. They're talking to completely different audiences. The president's talking to the conservative base and swing voters, and the Democrats are just talking to the Democrat base.
All right, so we'll have to compare when there is a nominee. Okay, Michael Beach of CrossStream Media and our very own Tom Giles, thank you both. Well, the U.S. Department of Transportation has asked for a wide-ranging review of how the government and Boeing certified the 737 MAX, the jet that has been involved in 2 fatal accidents since October. The 737 MAX family of jets was grounded by the FAA last Wednesday after evidence surfaced linking the October 31st Lion Air crash and Ethiopian Airlines crash on March 10th. Coming up, Google is pushing into the video game industry. What we know about the company's new Stadia streaming service next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Google is betting big on gaming. The tech giant unveiled its new Stadia game streaming at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco Tuesday. Stadia will let players access high-end games through the web without purchasing expensive consoles or personal computers. It's already being nicknamed the Netflix of gaming. Google also introduced its own game controller for console-like gaming on a computer or smartphone, though much remains to be seen about how well this will work. I spoke with Google Vice President Phil Harrison following the announcement. Take a listen.
We see it as the new generation of game platforms that combine the world of watching games and playing games into one seamless experience. This has been purpose-built for the 21st century, powered by the amazing technology that only Google can bring to bear.
But can only Google bring certain kinds of content? Will this have exclusive content?
Yes, we announced today the formation of Stadia Games and Entertainment, which is Google's first-party games development studio, and we are working with developers to create games exclusively for Stadia all around the world right now. We've already shipped hundreds of development tools to leading studios, and they're hard at work creating games for the platform.
Will you also be licensing content? Gaming content is a lot more expensive than sort of typical streaming video content.
We partner with game publishers and game developers, big and small. You saw in our presentation today some of the leading lights of the games industry from Ubisoft and Take-Two, all bringing their amazing experiences to our platform. But also it's about bringing YouTube creators into the mix, where a YouTube creator who has millions of subscribers can bring their fans into the game and allows game developers to connect with more and more people seamlessly across all the screens in their life.
Now, if this is successful, it could mean a huge shift in the gaming market. But how will you make sure that the experience is consistent across devices, given the differences in bandwidth, when it comes to everyone's internet experience?
Well, that's the magic of Google technology that runs in our data center that allows us to utilize our advances and investments in codecs and streaming technologies, both at the hardware, software, and service level. And that allows us to take the developer's original vision and stream it to the user's home, to the gamer's home, and allows us to stream up to 4K 60 frames per second with all the latest, greatest visual and audio capabilities and technologies that gamers are used to, but without the need for a dedicated box, console, or PC.
But do you then need to have a 4K TV? I know you also unveiled your own controller, though you don't need a console.
So if you have a 4K TV, then our technology will scale up to bringing that great quality of experience to your display. But if you have a laptop, which is less resolution, lower resolution, then our technology will adapt the stream to mean that we bring the best quality to the device that you play on. And as we showed in our presentation, you can seamlessly move between devices, whether it's on a phone, a laptop, a tablet, a PC, or a TV. The same game moves instantly and seamlessly between those devices.
The game streaming market could balloon to an estimated $11 billion. How much of that do you think Google could capture?
Well, the games industry is on its way to $140 billion this year, and we at Google already enjoy a significant partnership with game creators and developers all around the world through our Android, Play, and YouTube platforms. And with Stadia, we think there's an opportunity to grow this even more. If we can give more players the chance to connect with more games more seamlessly, this will grow the market for everybody.
Fit into Google's AR and VR efforts in the future?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
How could this fit into Google's augmented reality and virtual reality efforts in the future?
So Google continues a lot of very interesting and exciting R&D efforts, but we don't have anything to announce today.
My interview there with Google Vice President Phil Harrison. To discuss Stadia further, we're joined now by our Bloomberg intelligence analyst, Matt Cantorman. So, Matt, what do you think of what Google has unveiled and how disruptive this can be?
I mean, the future of gaming seems to be in the cloud. That's where everyone's driving towards. It just seems like we're at a point in time where the technology is just starting to come together. The platforms are just starting to emerge. It's very early, and as of now, without exclusive content, Google, you just saw the interview, they alluded to starting their own studio. That doesn't happen overnight. That takes roughly 5 years to get a product off the ground. And so they just hired Jade Raymond to run their studio. She's very well known in the industry, but at the end of the day, it's going to take several years for the infrastructure, for the content to be in place, for this to be a real business for Google. Up until then, Microsoft, Sony, the incumbent PC platforms like Steam are going to do just fine.
Do you think what they are attempting to do is technically possible, given, the quality of, video games in and of themselves? Is it really possible to recreate that in the living room without all the gear?
I like to say it's a pipe dream until the pipes improve, in the sense that the internet networks, the telecom networks, are the real hindrance to growth here. 5G is going to play a big part in getting this off the ground, the ability to deliver much more high-speed, low-latency broadband to many more people at a much lower cost, but also to every device is going to be a huge portion of it. Right now, most people don't have a broadband connection that's capable of running a service like Google's trying to offer here with Stadia, or what Microsoft's trying to do with xCloud. But over time, as fiber connections rise, as 5G penetration rises, we might get to a point in the next, call it 5 to 7 years, where, okay, now we can hit an inflection point and see this market really start to take off.
Now, the gaming industry is struggling with addiction. Doesn't this mean if you can just stop a game on your computer and continue it on your phone in the car, that this is going to make gaming even more addictive?
I think games do a lot of good things, especially for youth. It teaches you how to collaborate with people. It can, in many cases, teach you how to code, like games like Roblox do. But obviously, there's, too much of a good thing is a bad thing in many cases, and gaming's no exception. And that's just where things like parental controls, which Google did allude to, come into play. Limiting screen time in general across entertainment products, not just for games, whether that's watching video or social media. Those are all things that internet companies, gaming companies need to be socially conscious of, and that's something that Google did announce as part of the Stadia unveil today.
All right, Bloomberg's Matt Canterman, thank you so much for weighing in. Coming up, Facebook may be under scrutiny for bias, but the social media platform is now seeking to resolve a different crisis around its ad targeting. We'll discuss. And Bloomberg Tech live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Facebook says it will make major changes to its rules for advertisers in order to settle a string of lawsuits alleging its platform enables discrimination in housing, credit, and employment. The partial resolution of the long-running litigation over discriminatory ad strategies is a rare bit of good news, you might say, for the embattled company. Joining us now to discuss Bloomberg's Josh Idelson, or its Facebook attempt to resolve some bad news, right? What does Facebook have to do differently under this settlement?
So as part of this settlement, which the ACLU says is sweeping changes to the platform, now ads for housing, employment, and credit will not be able to be targeted specifically based on people's gender or their zip code or their age. Also, when Facebook uses its algorithm to create what they call a lookalike audience, where they put together people to serve your ad to who are similar to the customers or employees you already have, they also won't do it based on those criteria. Facebook will have robots and people testing compliance of these ads. They'll have their advertisers have to certify that they follow non-discrimination laws. They'll be meeting with the plaintiff groups. They'll make it so that if you're looking for housing, you'll be able to do a search of all the ads other people are able to see for housing, even if they're not targeted to you.
Now, Sheryl Sandberg in a statement said today's changes mark an important step in our broader effort to prevent discrimination and promote fairness and inclusion on Facebook. Facebook was under a lot of pressure to resolve this. I mean, the NBC has called for NAACP has called for Facebook boycotts. How much pressure was Facebook under here?
There's been increasing pressure on this coming from the NAACP, fair housing groups, members of the Senate of both parties. the ACLU. And this is something that's been going on for quite some time now, a series of lawsuits, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission charges, and it's presumably something the company is glad to potentially put behind us.
Now, ad targeting, like putting up signs in neighborhoods, has been, common practice for decades. What makes this different?
So Facebook has argued that there are situations where it's helpful to target ads to particular audiences. The point that scholars make is if an ad is put in a magazine you don't read or a neighborhood you don't live in, you could at least incidentally come across it. But on the internet, if you're digitally redlined out of it, so to speak, if the job is only posted there, it could essentially be impossible for you to ever even know about a job that you might be qualified for, even if you're not the type of person, so to speak, that the employer was looking to hire.
Could the removal of some of these lines impact other kinds of advertising?
Well, Facebook has said that there is the potential that these changes will be unwelcome to some advertisers in terms of getting what they want, and that it could impact them but not impact Facebook's revenue significantly.
Does this end all of the lawsuits, or are there still disputes out there simmering?
There is still simmering, escalating litigation against some of the companies that allegedly advertised in a discriminatory way on Facebook. So named defendants like Amazon and T-Mobile, a class of arguably hundreds of advertisers, they have a hearing in court next month.
So it remains to be seen, of course, how this will be executed. And, Facebook has often made these grand pronouncements, and then when you see the execution, there are mistakes being made. What will you be watching for?
Well, they're going to be meeting with the plaintiff groups, including the Communications Workers of America Union, which is separately in a coalition calling for the breakup of Facebook. So when they get together with that union, with the ACLU, with the housing groups every 6 months, it will be interesting to see what happens.
All right. Bloomberg's Josh Adelson, as always, thank you for your coverage of these issues. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, if you like what you see on Instagram, now you have the option to buy it. We've got the details on the social network's new e-commerce strategy next. And later in the show, another day, another Apple product update. This time, it is the iMac's turn. We will discuss the model and more. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. After years of posting beautiful images of food, fashion, and design on Instagram, people will now be able to buy items they see and like directly through the app. Starting today, Instagram is testing a shopping feature called Checkout with a handful of retailers, including Nike and Revolve. Shoppers will be able to pay with Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and PayPal. Joining us to discuss, PayPal Chief Operating Officer Bill Reddy. Also with us, Bloomberg Tech Sarah Fryer, who covers Instagram. So Sarah, how will this work?
So basically, in the Instagram app, you will be able to check out and purchase a product, which is unlike what we've seen before. Previously, they would redirect you to a retailer's website or app where you could complete your purchase. But what this does for Instagram is it gives them another line of revenue beyond advertising, which is going to be extremely significant to their business over the long term.
You wonder just how significant, Bill. How much business and traffic do you think this will drive for PayPal?
Well, this is building on a phenomenon we've seen for a long time of small businesses and other retailers having many new forums in which they're meeting buyers. And we think checkout on Instagram is a really great new experience. And Instagram itself has been a great forum for sellers to meet buyers. And as Sarah was just commenting on, this has been building for a long time in terms of buyers connecting with brands or with sellers there and then linking off to that seller's site. Now they'll complete the purchase right in context on Instagram. We think can help more of this activity happening, but this is something we hear from sellers all the time, that's a very important forum for them. And so we think this is quite an interesting new place for sellers to meet more buyers.
So it's interesting, but how big do you think it can be for you?
Well, if you look at our marketplace and partner business, separate from eBay, who continues to be a partner that we've worked with for a long time, but our top 20 marketplaces that we work with are already $85 billion in volume for us last year alone, and growing at 41% year on year. So that is a very large segment of our business, growing quite rapidly. And so our aspiration is that we want to connect our 30 million plus sellers to all the very best places for them to sell. And I think this is one of the important trends in commerce, is that a decade ago there was one place or a couple places that a seller could go, particularly a smaller seller could go to sell online. Now there's this explosion of new forums that they can go sell, and we want to help connect sellers to all the best places where they can meet buyers. And we think Instagram is quite important in that. And so we're quite excited about Instagram enabling native checkout right inside the Instagram, inside of the stories there. And we're quite excited to be powering some of those capabilities, particularly buyer transactions, as well as the seller side of those transactions as well, and partnering with them to help enable those experiences.
So, Sarah, Facebook's going through a lot of changes. We just talked about some changes to ad targeting around housing and credit ads. Mark Zuckerberg has said the company is going to shift towards more private communications. Lots of questions how that will impact the ad business. How much revenue do you think this will drive, Instagram commerce will drive, for the Facebook company?
It's hard to say because it's so early, but what I think is really important to keep in mind is that Facebook's legacy business, the news feed and the advertising that runs in the news feed, is not going to grow much more from here. It's already so saturated in all these big advertising markets around the world. So the company has really been investing in figuring out what their next business models are. And e-commerce is something that executives mentioned on the earnings call as like a very big priority for them for the future, alongside things happening in messaging, which may be harder to monetize. So I think that this is one of the few bright spots they have that is maybe more proven than some of the other things they're trying, like cryptocurrency and encrypted messaging.
So let's talk about the less bright spots. And Bill, Facebook, Instagram are both getting plagued by, hate, misinformation. And you look at many, many Instagram comments. This is a problem on Instagram. Does that concern you about being associated with that?
Well, we've partnered with Facebook across, multiple forums for some time. We have a growing partnership there, and one of the things that we enable is fraud tools, things that enable marketplace and partner operators to go make sure that they're getting buyers that are legitimate buyers, and they're getting sellers that are legitimate sellers. This is something that across all the different forums we enable, we provide buyer and seller protection in those different forums. So separate from how we engage here, across the way we engage with our consumers and merchants, we help consumers shop without sharing sensitive financial information. We help merchants connect to more of these forums. And so, certainly there's a number of things that are being addressed across some of these places, but can this be a great forum for commerce? I think you already see a number of sellers really engaging with buyers there. And so I think certainly it's already a great forum for that. This only makes it better. And we're excited to partner on this, and not only providing tools that help with the purchases coming in and the sales going out, but also how you go combat fraud and these types of things.
One question for you, Bill. Do you think that consumers will have any hesitancy about sharing their credit card number with Facebook through this kind of transaction, or will PayPal prevent that from having to happen?
Well, this is something, when you use the PayPal button, broadly, when you use that PayPal button, it's helping you to go complete a purchase without having to go through the friction of adding a card. That said, there are going to be plenty of users that want to go provide a card directly, and we're helping to enable those transactions as well. So users can make those determinations of where they feel comfortable with that, but that's one of the things that we provide, is the ability to go check out and not have to go type those things in, which takes friction out of the process in any event. But either way the user wants to do that, we're going to give the user that choice.
You're taking friction out of the process, but, I guess to Sarah's point, in light of all of the, more recent privacy concerns around Facebook, do you think users are going to want to share and store their payment information with Instagram today?
I think you see a lot of users really wanting to go connect with sellers and with brands there already. So certainly, making it a place where users feel comfortable doing that is important, and is something that we're working together on. I think it's something that PayPal as a checkout option certainly helps with directly, but I think you see a lot of users already engaging there. So I think the question of, do users want to engage in that forum, I think that's already happening. And I think this is something that makes that even better for those users and more seamless for those users.
So Sarah, we mentioned Nike, Revolve. What other retailers are kicking this off?
I think that it's just going to be a very small group for now, but what I'm most excited about is in the future, all of these people that have created their businesses on Instagram based off their followings will be able to build a marketplace there, and that's going to be like uncharted territory.
So we will be able to buy Kylie Jenner's lipstick on Instagram. Is that what you're saying?
I think one day we will be, and that these businesses, Glossier today just had a more than $1 billion valuation in their latest round. These businesses that have been built up via Instagram followings will have a more direct way to sell, and maybe we'll be able to see a little bit more into how that works, how big that market is.
All right, Sarah Fryer for Bloomberg Tech, PayPal COO Bill Reddy. Bill, thank you so much for dialing in today. Good to have you. Well, Tesla's manic year of production took its toll on workers. Staff at the automaker's lone assembly plant in Fremont, California, spent almost 3 times as many days off the job because of work-related injuries and illness in 2018 as the year before, an indication of just how much strain they were under as they manufactured electric cars at scale for the first time. When taking headcount growth into account, the amount of time away per worker doubled last year, according to Tesla's report to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, while the overall rate of injuries per hour of work remained roughly the same as in 2017. Coming up, using AI and video games to reinvent school testing. We are going to hear from a Harvard dropout who has a plan to even the playing field in higher education. This is Bloomberg. Beauty startup Glossier is now technically a unicorn after its latest funding round. The company announced it's raised $100 million in Series D funding led by Sequoia Capital, pushing its valuation to $1.2 billion. CEO Emily Weiss said, "We are building an entirely new kind of beauty company, one that owns the distribution channel and makes our customers stakeholders." LA-based startup Embellis has a plan to fix college admissions, and boy, do we know they need fixing after 50 parents, coaches, and test administrators were indicted in a wide-ranging scam. The idea here is to find a better way to test for critical thinking skills and better link education to employment. The company's founder is a 27-year-old entrepreneur who dropped out of Harvard. Rebecca Cantor will also be on the cover of this week's issue of Bloomberg Business Week. She spoke with Bloomberg's Carol Masser and Jason Kelly.
The ears who this argument certainly resonates when they hear kind of the approach of relinking education to employment as employers. There's an interesting, actually, Bloomberg Next poll that shows about 40% of students feel they're prepared for work when they leave the entire education system, and 40% of employers feel that students are prepared for work. Interestingly, 72% of college providers feel their students are prepared for work. So there's a little bit of asynchronicity in terms of where perceptions are of the value of an educational experience and an employment experience. And it's not unreasonable because there probably are some colleges that do really prepare kids for work and for life, and there are others that really don't. And so I think what has to happen now, and what we're seeing some positive reception around, is employers have to take the lead on saying, here are the skills that are becoming more important in an age where human intelligence is involving higher order thinking skills, and machine intelligence is doing the lower order ones. We've got to see collaborative problem solving. We've got to see people who can imagine and create. We have to see that people can synthesize quickly with new information, with data, that they can build a cogent argument. And, you know, there's some of that in standardized testing today, but it's kind of this myopic view. It's a little bit of argument supported by some evidence. And the challenge is, you know, how often for all of us are we dealing with a static system where everything's written down for us and there are no changing new rules or information? Never. So you need technology that can really bring forward the employer's desires into the education market as a reality in a tried tried and tested tool as an educational standard. And that's what makes our job so hard. It's not a quick process to go out and find those definitions of skills that matter.
Not one standardized.
No, and then you've got to bring it in. But I would say that argument of bringing the employers into the conversation about how their work is changing, what the future is going to require, and bringing that back, many parents care, and they're choosing that with their dollars. My goal is definitely to set a higher floor for high schools. So know that some schools are going to do a crappy job teaching differently, and it's no fault of theirs. There's all sorts of systemic problems that make it hard to teach. But perhaps if you can relieve a little bit of that pressure around content, a little bit around teaching so many different modules of AP biology or science curriculum or history curriculum, not get rid of it, just reduce a little bit and focus on a few concepts. Maybe some schools choose to bring that to life with solar-powered go-kart races. Maybe other schools in Pasadena choose to have kids intern at JPL for a couple weeks. Whatever the scenario is that's best for those kids, I want a test that we deliver to be generalizable enough that their progress shows up and that we recognize what they have. And it doesn't mean that all kids who do well on the SAT are going to do poorly on our test. I would expect many who do well on the SAT are going to do well on our test and vice versa. But maybe some kids who are total diamonds in the rough, who are out there slogging through a lot of content that doesn't land for them. Maybe there's a way to recognize some of the skills they have going on behind the scenes, whether they got that in a job after school or watching a sibling or over a summer. I hope that our tests are able to at least set a new North Star for the system.
You can read about Rebecca Cantor's company, Embellis, in this week's Bloomberg Business Week and hear from more of the magazine's subjects, reporters, and editors every Saturday and Sunday on Bloomberg Television and radio. Still ahead, by 2021, mobile games are expected to become a $100 billion market. But is Google's entrance into the video game industry a threat to established game makers? We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. The Game Developers Conference is in San Francisco this week, and mobile gaming is, of course, one of the top items on the agenda. According to new data from Newzoo, more than 2.4 billion people will play mobile games this year. Major game studios like Zynga got a head start in this lucrative market. Zynga has completed 2 mobile gaming acquisitions in the last year. Joining us to discuss Zynga and industry trends, Zynga CEO Frank Gibeau. Frank, good to have you back here on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So obviously Zynga struck gold with hit games like Farmville, Words with Friends, Zynga Poker, and then there was a really long dry spell, and you were brought in to turn the company around. What does the new Zynga look like today?
The new Zynga is a mobile-first company. We are completely focused and dedicated to driving what we call forever franchises on mobile.
Wasn't Zynga always a mobile-first company?
No, it was on web. It really made its name on the Facebook platform back in the day on Canvas. And then when the transition of the market from Facebook Canvas to mobile happened, Zynga got out of position. And so when our team came in 3 years ago, our job was to transition the company fully over to mobile, get Farmville and Words with Friends and Zynga Poker to be working on mobile in a much bigger and more effective way. And that's what we've sought out to do, and that's what we've accomplished.
So for you, is it still about just creating these hits and then making sure you can create another one?
It is,
or is success something different? You
know, I mean, games is a perfect conflict of technology and entertainment, and it is a hit-driven business. But what's cool about mobile is people will play mobile games for very long periods of time. Zynga Poker is 10 years old, Words with Friends is 8 years old, and we have fans that have been playing those games for very long periods of time. And because we have a free-to-play model that's accessible to everyone, it's really important to bring them into the game and then give them enough due to say stay in the game for as long as possible. So it's a live operations kind of mentality. It's very fast, it's very quick. And it's focused on daily rewards.
You worked at EA for 2 decades.
Yes.
And you've got Google now trying to enter the gaming industry. It's already being called the Netflix of gaming, which might be overly optimistic. But what do you think of Google's efforts here?
Look, I think gaming is a fantastic category to be in because it's constantly innovating. And if you look at Google's announcement, it's innovating on multiple levels, which I think is good for consumers. And it has some open questions, though. I think what's good for consumers is it's starting to bring streaming as a distribution innovation available to everyone, which as a content maker is a great thing. You know, content innovation and distribution innovation go hand in hand. So the ability to reach multiple screens and players everywhere through streaming is great. I think what they're doing as well by removing a lot of the price up front for hardware opens it up to other bands where people might not have the $500 to buy a console. So we really like those aspects of it. Whether or not subscriptions work or not remains to be seen. There's a kind of a question out there about how many subscriptions will a gamer have. You're going to have content exclusives on different platforms. It's not quite like movies where you have an unlimited library. So there's going to be a lot of challenges in terms of how many subscriptions gamers will pick up, and then how does it work for content makers. The production model for games can be very expensive, and when you're divvying up a subscription price on a monthly basis, it doesn't always work out. So I think that'll be one of the biggest challenges for them to figure out.
Do you have any plans to put Zynga's games on Google's platform?
We've talked to Google. We're very good partners with them on the mobile Android platform, and it certainly is something that we're looking at.
What about Apple or Epic?
There is a bit of a store wars thing going on right now. Again, another distribution innovation that I think benefits content makers like ourselves. So, we're platform agnostic, and we will make games available to fans wherever we can.
So you struck some big licensing deals: Disney for Star Wars, Warner Media, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter. What is your view on acquiring licenses versus creating games and your own IP, which is what you did with Farmville?
Well, when we started out a couple years ago looking at the business, we felt we had room for some strategic licenses. We like big licenses that last for very long periods of time. I stood in line for the first Star Wars, and I'm still working on it. And so from our perspective, we want franchises that last for very long periods of time, and those are brands that have huge global audiences and really helps cut through the clutter in mobile. There's a lot of mobile games released every year. The stores are flooded with titles, and when you have Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Game of Thrones, it really cuts through that clutter that you see in terms of how things are merchandised or communicated. So brands are powerful multipliers to attract audiences and bring customers into your portfolio. At the same time, we do have a lot of wholly owned IP like Farmville, like Cityville, Words with Friends, Zynga Poker, that really balances out having owned IP as well as the licenses.
All right, Zynga CEO Frank Gibeau will be watching Zynga this year. Thank you
very much
for stopping by. All right, Monday, we saw the new Apple iPad lineup. Now, Tuesday, we're getting a glimpse at an updated iMac desktop computer. This is the first update to this product line in 2 years. The once dominant product for Apple has taken a back seat to the iPhone in the last decade. For more, I want to get to LA, where our own Mark Gurman is standing by. So, Mark, why all the updates in 1 week?
Yeah. Right. It seems like, first of all, Apple wants to clear the deck ahead of their March 25th services event, where they're announcing their Netflix competitor. But we're also seeing from Apple sort of a strategy where they're updating all of their products that they've really let languish in recent years. If you go back to October, they updated the Mac Mini and the MacBook Air. Those products hadn't been updated in about half a decade, and in the Air's case, hadn't been redesigned in about 8 or 9 years. Fast forward to 2019, the iMac hasn't been updated in 2 years, they're updating it. The iPad Air was discontinued years ago in favor of the iPad Pro, and they brought that product back after 3 or 4 years. Likewise with the iPad Mini. The iPad Mini hadn't been updated since 2015, and now they're updating that. And there's also talk that there's going to be a new iPod Touch this year. So there's a lot of things that have been long in the tooth that they're finally getting to, and it seems like they're listening to the consumers and basically giving every consumer what they're asking for.
Meantime, Reed Hastings has confirmed in a rare interview that Netflix won't be part of Apple's new service, which we expect them to unveil on Monday. What do you make of this?
Yeah, so this was an interview yesterday with Lucas Shaw, who covers entertainment for us in Los Angeles. And Lucas asked him if they're going to be part of the new Apple streaming service. And it's important because a big part of Apple's service is partnerships with other companies, given they have such few shows and movies ready from the original side. And, Reed Hastings said, hey, we're not going to be part of it. We'd rather people use our service. And it makes sense. Netflix has been trying to distance themselves from Apple in recent years. They no longer are a revenue share partner for subscriptions through the App Store. They have people subscribe externally, so Apple doesn't get a 30% cut. So it makes sense that they would want to be a competitor here rather than a partner.
So is it a loss for Apple that Netflix won't be on its platform?
It's not necessarily a loss for Apple, but what we've seen before are partnerships, other companies clamoring to partner with Apple. Apple typically was able to come to companies, ask them to join, take a large revenue slice, and come from a position of power. Whereas now Netflix, they really have no reason or incentive to partner with Apple, whereas other services you've seen companies wanting to jump in with Apple pretty quickly.
So you and I are going to be at this event on Monday. Are we going to see celebrities? Like, is Oprah going to be there?
Well, you're going to be there, so we'll see. We'll see at least one. But Apple is going to be working with Oprah eventually. It's to be seen if she's going to be there. We know that Jennifer Aniston may be there. J.J. Abrams, a big-time executive producer, is going to be there. I'm sure there'll be a few others sprinkled throughout the crowd. At least on stage, we'll see them in different promotions. My belief is they're going to show some trailers or videos really promoting some of the original content, shows and movies that they've been preparing. So we'll see them at least from that perspective.
And yes, Mark Gurman is going to be there. He is a celebrity at these Apple events. He gets a lot of selfie requests, let me tell you. And you always agree. Thank you, our very own Mark Gurman. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.